Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now we know that carbon in the atmosphere is increasing at an unsustainable rate and that half of all native trees on Earth have already been felled. And this is having impacts on our lives and on wildlife globally. But recent studies have also shown that we have nearly 1 billion hectares of land suitable for ecosystem restoration. That's space for nearly 1 trillion trees, capturing around 30% of the excess carbon in our air. If done in the right way, with the right species in the right places, this could form part of the global solution to climate change. But with more data available than ever before, how do we make sense of it all and learn about what's working in restoration and rewilding projects? How do we put data into people's hands so they can act more quickly, with more confidence and have greater impacts? Well, today we're speaking to Andrew Cottam, who's Head of Geospatial at an exciting new venture called Restor, a free online platform for the restoration movement. Restor is like Google Maps for nature. It connects practitioners with ecological data and builds networks between activists, funders, and the public. And for the first time, major scientific data sets are at the fingertips of conservationists, helping local knowledge to fuel global change. Now, since launching just last year, Restor has connected over more than 70,000 restoration sites worldwide, helping thousands of local actions to become a global movement and becoming a runner-up in the hugely prestigious Earthshot Prize along the way. So if you want to know more about how technology is helping in the battle to restore life on Earth and how you can get involved in your lives or in your careers, then listen on. Enjoy.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Cottam. I'm Head of Geospatial at Restor, based in Zurich in Switzerland.
Great. And it's so good having you on the podcast. We're old friends, so it's kind of good to kind of reconnect and to see what's going on in your career. And there's loads of exciting stuff to talk about here today.
Yeah.
One thing you've been working on, I guess, as a kind of a theme through all your work is just the processing of data. I mean, there's so much data available to conservationists nowadays. And more data, better quality data from satellites and drones and phones and all the technology that we've kind of got available to us. It's produced an opportunity to understand the world almost in real time. And I'm interested to kind of know, like, what sort of opportunities does that present conservationists on the ground, and what sort of problems does it present too?
Yeah, I mean, there is a real revolution in terms of the knowledge world out there, particularly driven by satellites, but also now increasingly through artificial intelligence, and the amount of information that you can derive from imagery, for example. And I think it's obviously really important for conservationists in the field, because if they're making decisions, then that needs to be supported by reliable evidence. And if you can get good evidence on how the land cover has changed in the last 20-30 years, for example, that's really important. If you can get reliable information, field-based information on what species and habitats you've got within your sites, then all of this information is absolutely critical if you're doing restoration in the field. And that's the thing that is so exciting now, is that the technologies and the processing enable so many analyses and so many insights into conservation and restoration, and it's fantastic.
It is. It feels like a sort of new age really dawning in terms of what we can achieve and the speed and the quality of what we can do with the data that's kind of come through. And you talk about restoration. We're here to talk about Restor really today, which is this new exciting project that you're working on and is slowly kind of coming out into the public. I was playing on it today, having a little kind of crash around. But what do we mean by restoration? Like, if we sort of set the scene there, what do we mean by that key phrase?
Well, the phrase restoration, it has slightly different meaning to different people, but essentially it's putting nature back to how it was in many cases, and so if you have a particular habitat that's been degraded or destroyed, then it's the the restoration of that habitat back to how it was. Now, obviously, in some cases, there are different motivations for doing restoration. It may be biodiversity, it may be socioeconomic, so they might be farmers who are looking to agroforestry to supplement their income, for example. So restoration encompasses lots and lots of things. And then there's the more kind of subtle types of restoration, which is you have a habitat which hasn't necessarily been degraded, but there are some keystone species that you've lost, and you may want to just get those keystone species back again. So your process of restoration is all about encouraging maybe reintroductions, and that's not necessarily restoration of the habitat per se, but it's certainly restoration of the ecosystem. You're bringing species back.
Right, and I guess so. An example of that might be, I'm in the UK right now, bringing beavers back into our landscapes, or wolves or bears, and that almost like the rewilding movement, is encompassed within that definition.
Yeah, and that presents some challenges. There's a few cases of here in Italy where ecologists have brought back in bears over in the northeast of Italy, and they've kind of run havoc amongst all of the beekeepers, because they've gone in and they've removed lots of their hives, and so there's a bit of kind of human wildlife conflict in some cases where we get restoration doing restoring things back to how they were at some point in the past, whichever point you take in the past.
Yeah, which is always a bit of a challenge for conservation. It's like, when do you say this is the point we want to be back, like sort of shifting baseline? Yeah. We all remember there were more starlings when we were kids.
Yeah, exactly. So long as they don't say we want to get back to that point in 1970s where we have industrial agriculture, it has to be before that, I guess.
Yeah. So what is Restore then? Tell us a bit about the current effort that you're working on. What's the big idea behind it, and where's it going?
The big idea behind it is it kind of grew out of there's a lab within ETH in Zurich, which is a university in Zurich, called the Crowther Lab. And Tom Crowther, who's an ecologist, has been working for many years on producing global data sets. And he published a couple of papers on the potential for restoring forests around the world. Yeah. And he wanted to kind of find some way of channeling all of the effort on the ground and enabling better restoration and inspiring people and helping to catalyze the flow of money into restoration. So more like a kind of a business, if you like, of restoration. And so Restore Foundation kind of grew out of that idea of Tom's, which was to create this organization which would facilitate all of this stuff. And so for the last year and a half, we were born in November last year, and there's now 12 of us based in Zurich, and lots of people working remotely. But the main emphasis right now is on building the community of restoration practitioners. So we've got about 75,000 restoration sites now, which are on the platform.
Wow.
Many of those are still private, because people always have concerns about privacy and sharing, and we're trying to encourage people to share that information publicly. And so we have about 8,000 public sites, and they're basically locations where people have said, this is where I'm doing restoration work. This is, these are the species that I'm working on. This is the kind of habitat it was when we started, what kind of restoration we're doing. And it's, the main focus is kind of three things. It's, first of all, it's providing some kind of scientific advice to restoration practitioners on the kinds of habitats that they could be restoring, the kinds of species that they should think about planting in the case of trees and herbaceous plants. And then there's the monitoring side of it. We really want to encourage the transparency in the monitoring. So that's a big area for me in taking big data, satellite imagery, doing large processing on it through a technology called Google Earth Engine, which has kind of revolutionized remote sensing. And then taking the field monitoring data as well. So we have a 2-year project to look at how we can scale monitoring in the field to measure restoration success kind of transparently. Because if you want to encourage people to invest in it, then you need to have, that transparency. And the big focus on that at the moment is carbon, which is good and bad. But we're trying to encourage people to plant responsibly as well. So if they're doing restoration of forests, to make sure that they're picking native species, for example. And then the final one, so there's the kind of the scientific advice, there's the monitoring, and then the final one is kind of building this sense of community and connecting people who are doing restoration. So really providing a platform where people can, find other organizations who are working in similar situations, similar habitats, with similar goals, kind of thing.
So I guess
that's the main aim of it.
Yeah. So the users of the platform would be, let's say if I owned a woodland nearby and I wanted to restore it, I could share it via the Restore platform. It would tell me what tree species I need to be thinking about. It could help me to monitor that site over time. Yeah. And it could help to connect me to other individuals doing similar things, and I can kind of learn from their successes and failures and share mine also.
Exactly. And in the long term, I think that the main, or Tom's main vision is he wants to make it kind of like the Google Maps of restoration. So that would be, you would go in, you would see a map, and then in your local area, you would see things like, where are your tree nurseries? Where could you get suitable planting material for, native species or critically endangered species? Where might you get some where might you source some monitoring equipment like drones, for example, or camera traps or something like that? So you have all of the kind of the business around restoration on a map, and so that you would be able to kind of connect to people that can help you in doing that restoration, for example.
Wow, so really connected on the ground projects, but with a kind of global vision of trying to get more trees planted, ultimately more ecosystems restored, but in the right way as well. These are not just kind of monocultures, which could be damaging in some instances. These are actually functioning ecosystems that are locally relevant to that particular site.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's that's one of the main issues is, how do you encourage people to plant mixed, if it's forest, how do you encourage them to plant mixed species, rather than just a monoculture, which may give them the most sort of return, but not necessarily the best for biodiversity.
Got you. Yeah. Let's talk about the tech then that sits behind this, because I know that's kind of where a lot of your skill set. Are you rubbing your hands now? That's where your very much expertise lies. Now, you just mentioned, was it Google Earth
Engine? Yeah.
Google Earth Engine. Well, what's that? That sounds interesting. What does it enable?
It's a kind of 10, 15 years old disruptive technology that Google came up with in the face of huge increase in satellite imagery, and basically it's different than Google Earth. It's nothing to do with Google Earth, but it's literally millions of satellite images that are hosted on the cloud and allow you to process that imagery, to do your analyses, and to get your insights yourself using just a web browser. So in the good old days of remote sensing, you would have to physically download one satellite scene, which would be 5 minutes, and then you would have to run through a whole set of pre-processing steps to get that image ready for analysis. And then at the end of it, you could do your analysis, and then you could publish your results. But invariably, that whole process would take a week, 10 days, something like that, for one part of the world. And you imagine, if you want to do the whole world, you have to do that times 3 million or something. It's completely unsustainable. So what Google Earth Engine does is it has all of that infrastructure, it has all of the imagery, it has all of the pre-processing across, it's a multi-processor environment. So when you run things, you can run them in near real time. So I can analyze satellite images in near real time. So I have an image and I press go, and it can show me all of the rivers, for example. I was involved in a project on what's called the global surface water in my previous job. And we published this paper in Nature, which was basically 35 years worth of surface water and surface water changes. And Earth Engine allows you to do that. And if you, at the end of the project, we looked at how much compute time we had. And if you'd run that analysis on a single computer, it would have been 1,024 years in total in the processing.
And it would definitely have crashed.
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of gives you some idea about just, this is really, really incredible stuff, and something that people have not been able to do until 10 years ago, and it's still evolving. And there's a lot more computer vision coming in now, so it's a bit worrying, because it could be the it could be the death knell of scientists. When you have computer vision, and if you give it enough data, if you give them enough training data, these classification algorithms are actually better than humans now, and scientists. And
in terms of predicting exactly what habitat type an area is, or something like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that the confidence levels are getting better and better, and the more imagery, the more training data you give these models, then the better they get. And so it means that, now if we say this is a lowland dipterocarp forest, we're 95% certain that's what it is. And, it's really helping in understanding how land changes through time.
Wow. And you said a minute ago, like nearly real time as well. Like, what does that mean? And does that mean we can almost respond to things that are happening on the ground too? I mean, how quick is the feedback?
Yeah, in terms of the nearly real time, that's in terms of the analysis. So when I'm in a browser and I'm looking at a satellite image, that image may have been collected 2 or 3 weeks ago. But when I say real time, it's actually showing me the image and doing the analysis in real time. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait 3 or 4 hours.
Does several things together, right?
Yeah, but the speed now, or the lag between a photograph from space and getting it into Earth Engine, is now down to about 8 hours, something like that. So it's actually pretty responsive. If you're looking at things like floods, for example, fires, events which happen and are really important to respond to, then those sorts of things you can respond to now, because you've got this short lag between the acquisition and the availability of the imagery.
I mean, could that be used for monitoring, say, logging of the Amazon, or something where illegal logging? I mean, places that should be protected, that suddenly, they're being logged.
It already is. Yeah, I mean, there's a big project called Global Forest Watch, which is one of the most widely used, and that does just that. It's looking at deforestation of not just the Amazon but the whole world, and in some cases regeneration of forests as well, because there is also natural regeneration happening too. But Global Forest Watch is really good for that.
Interesting. Right. So when you were building Restore and you're kind of pulling in the data there, I mean, talk through in terms that I would understand the process you've had to go through then for the last 12 months or so. What sort of ride have you gone through in terms of identifying the data, bringing it together, and making it available in a way that me and other lay people can actually really use?
Yeah, well, in Restore, we're kind of a mixture between science and implementation. So we're very reliant on the scientists for producing these really top-notch kind of global scientific models for things like carbon and productivity and vegetation indices and many other things. And so we have the scientific data sets, but then we also, because we're trying to build this community of restoration practitioners, we're trying to get the information from them about where they're working in the field and what they're doing. So we've been building this platform for the last kind of year with Google, and a lot of that process has been about how do you bring in the data, and how do you structure it and organize it, and then how you can then do the analysis on that information. So we have lots of kind of sausage machines, of this stuff coming in, lots of things happening to it, and then that goes into the website.
Got you.
And we're trying to make those as efficient as possible.
And how important has been the collaboration with Google? I mean, how much support and expertise and processing power and information is an organization like that helping a project like this?
It's been, completely invaluable. The support is really, really fantastic, and most of the time Google just want to see an impact. They don't kind of micromanage. They don't look at all of the financial reports and what the detail of what you've done. What they're really interested in at the end of the project is what impact have you had, and show us where that impact has been. And so it's been, we've had so far we've had a couple of relationships with them. We've had building the platform itself, and that was the Google Creative Lab. And we've also got Google funding this monitoring, these field trials. and so it's just been, amazing, really. And they're incredibly dedicated to the cause. And I think there's two kind of parts, because there is sometimes there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction you get from people when you say, oh yeah, Google built the platform, and then people kind of instantly think, oh, I'm not going to give you any data then, because there is this nervousness. And I think there is this perception that somehow if Google take your data, then that they're going to look at it and they're going to do things with it that you're not happy with. But that's not the case with what we've been in our experience at all. And I think there's the google.org, which is the kind of the philanthropic part of Google, and then google.com, which is obviously a business, and they have to make money, and they're quite successful in that, shall we say.
Yeah, but because of that, they enable and support projects like this, so
absolutely
big tech being put to good use.
Yeah, completely. And also the other thing about Google that's great is they tend to fund things that nobody else is interested in, but are actually really important, because a lot of what they're interested in is informatics and in structuring information and making that available, making it interoperable, which means that you can share information as a community and it means something to people. So we have these projects looking at standards for restoration monitoring. How do you know when your restoration is working and being successful? And you have to have some common kind of language that you talk about, and common kind of procedures that you're going to do in the field. And a lot of these are funded through Google. So it's really, that kind of thing is not sexy, it's not exciting, and this is something that they fund and they're passionate about. So it's great.
It's amazing. I mean, we're not here to sell Google, and in fact, I've got a device here that keeps talking to me when we use that G word, particularly the word "okay" before.
Yeah, but their mission, and you're in the middle of a meeting, and then suddenly it will start talking to you.
Exactly, But I guess their mission is to organise the world's knowledge, as best I understand it. So this is bang on mission statement, and what it's allowing organisations like you to achieve is to restore a planet's biodiversity, like 1 trillion trees. So
absolutely. And the next phase for us is going to be trying to get to that kind of endpoint, of the monitoring and the transparency, to try and look at how many trees are being planted. So we're currently particularly keen on something called tree crown delineation, which is where you have satellite imagery or aerial or drone imagery, and you're able to identify individual trees and the crowns of those trees within the imagery. And that enables you to do some really interesting things. So first of all, you can just get some metrics about, okay, they said they planted 100,000 trees, did they? And you can do some kind of policing or enforcement on that. But you can also then start to have a look at the variability. So from the ecological perspective, you can start looking at diversity of crown shapes, sizes, spectrum from light, so you can get maybe different species identifications. You can look at health and condition monitoring. So there's a whole range of these kind of downstream ecological indicators that are not just valuable in terms of a transparency point of view, but from an ecological point of view. You can really start to understand how ecosystems work, and that's something that's not really been done at a big scale before. We're still a long way off from doing that, but that's the aim.
But you can see the vision, and you can sort of see at that global scale, you could actually showcase the best examples where the metrics are really kind of moving the needle the most. This is where we've got the most tree planted of the highest quality and the most carbon captured, as whatever your metrics are. And showcase that to funders to channel more investment into those sorts of projects. Others can learn from that, because they should be doing it too, and actually put some figures and facts to it, which allows us to see whether we're meeting these global targets that politicians kind of keep setting, but also kind of keep missing.
Yeah, completely. And also that, the targets aren't just coming from the politicians now, they're also coming from the big corporates, so there are plenty of organizations that have pledges for planting 1 million trees, 1 trillion. And I think, there are some places, I noticed yesterday in Wales, they were going to plant another 3 million or something. But, some organizations have got some really big, ambitious dreams to plant. There's the Trillion Trees campaign is one of them, for example. And that's going to make a big difference to carbon sequestration.
So where do you hope an idea like Restore is going to go? Like, where's the end point? If we can say, I don't know, 10 years from now. So you say, the Google software we've just been talking about is 10 years old and it's moved on an awful lot already. We've got 8-hour uptime, and all that sort of stuff. 10 years from now, projecting forwards, where could, if Restore was widely successful, like we all hope it will be, what will it be enabling?
I think probably the most important thing is really understanding what works and what doesn't work in the field, because there are plenty of examples of where restoration has not succeeded, and I always smile to myself when I'm going down a motorway back in the UK, and you see all of these areas where they've planted loads and loads of trees with these plastic tape round, and then you go back a year later and everything's dead, and there are so many examples of where restoration fails. And I think if we can learn when it can succeed, when interventions are necessary, when you should leave habitats to restore naturally, that kind of thing, it's really understanding the process and the science behind restoration. And I think in 10 years time, it's kind of like, I remember Tom pitched it to me one day. He said it's like the biggest field trial in the world. You've got all of these restoration sites, they're all doing restoration, they're all trying different things, different techniques, and if you can bring all the results from those together, then you can really understand about what works, how you can accelerate restoration, how you can really achieve these kinds of restoration and biodiversity goals. And so for me, it kind of feels like a big field trial. And I think in 10 years time, if we can really bring together all of that knowledge and all of the experiences from these practitioners, then hopefully we'll get better at restoring nature.
Really exciting. Yeah, we spoke to Professor Bill Sutherland from Conservation Evidence a couple of years back now on the podcast, and he said that the mission of that, which is very aligned to what you're saying, is to do more of what's been proven to work and less of what's not been proven to work, like bringing the scientific rigor to practitioners, if you like. Yeah, and that idea, exactly, that concept of a global experiment is really exciting.
I think that, the big issue, or one of the big issues in my head, is that more often than not, you learn a lot more by the ones that have failed, but they're not the most forthcoming when it comes to sharing their experience, because if they're dependent on funding, they're not going to come forward and say, oh yeah, we were going to do some coral reef restoration and it completely failed. Oh, it's not great PR.
No, and it doesn't get published, the journal of no results.
Exactly.
So someone else has to do it again and learn it didn't work as well. Oh gosh. Well, I'd love to know a bit more about your career as well, Andy, while we've got you on the call, because our careers have been intertwined. You used to work with my wife back in the day as well, and I guess how would you describe your particular area of expertise? Like, what label would you put on what you do?
I think it comes down to, because I'm passionate conservationist, very passionate bird watcher. I love bird watching. But for me, it's about how you can use technology to benefit conservation. And that's always the area that I've worked in. And I've tried to kind of find new areas of technology that can be used and applied for some kind of conservation gain. And so I don't have any any formal training in informatics or in analyses or software development or anything, but I've always kind of looked for these new technologies and thought, okay, that's going to be really good for doing this in conservation, and just kind of followed that aim. And I think it's like both the intellectual challenge of problem solving, because in many cases you're problem solving, coupled with potentially the impact in the field. That's kind of driven me, I suppose. And I kind of feel like I do sometimes get imposter syndrome, because I think I'm not formally trained in any of this stuff. Originally I was an ecologist, but I'm not formally trained certainly in computer science. So I do get a bit of that, but after 20, 25 years of doing it, I'm feeling a bit more kind of relaxed.
That feels like quite a lot of training under your belt, actually. Yeah. So it feels like you're sort of like an early adopter of these technologies. You you're on the kind of ahead of the curve. Like,
completely, because I think you absolutely have to push things as hard as you can, and particularly in the science field is quite competitive. So if you do want to succeed in science, then you have to try and look for new innovations. But within Restore, we really want to have unique things to offer people. So we're really trying to push on the technology front and try and come up with some innovations.
Yeah. And can you just paint like a quick potted history of your career to date then? When you look back, what have been the key steps you've taken to kind of get to where you are? What do you think's helped you along the way?
I think definitely, well, my career started in UK government, and I spent 10, 11 years working in UK government. It was only ever supposed to be 6 months, but kind of ended up being longer. And so then I went into work in an NGO based in Cambridge, a place called the World Conservation Monitoring Centre, where I was head of GIS there. I was there for a couple of years, and then 10 years in a research centre here in Italy, and then the Joint Research Centre, and then the last year in Restor in Zurich. And I guess the main things for me within my career have been looking for opportunities to potentially have an impact and work on projects that I think are important. And I've been really lucky because through most of my career, there have been moments when it's like, I haven't got a job, what am I going to do? And there's always been the option of kind of leaving conservation and going into to get a proper job, if you like. And I've been lucky enough to stick with conservation, and it's not always easy. But I think in some cases, if you have a background in remote sensing and GIS, there are probably more proper jobs, should I say, than in field-based conservation. So I know in field-based conservation, it's very, it's difficult. You obviously, in most cases, you have to do long periods of volunteer work, etc., in the field. But I've been lucky in my career because I've had kind of this niche area of informatics and GIS that there are not so many people competing. It's not quite such a attractive job, I guess, for many people. I don't spend much time in the field, but and so I think, in that sense, I've been quite lucky. And being in a niche in that respect, you tend to find things, especially now, it's becoming much more of a common set of skills that people need, in a world where data is becoming more important in making decisions and knowledge management, then it's becoming more common now.
And what are the particular characteristics or trait skill sets that people who work in informatics, GIS, geographic information systems, digital mapping, whatever we want to call it, what those people you look around and say, well, they're just doing so well in their careers. I'm not saying it's you, but to me it's you. What are the characteristics that stand out? If people are listening, like what do they need to be developing, skills, knowledge, character traits in themselves?
I think the biggest one is inquisitiveness.
Yeah.
So always being interested in what you're doing and never losing sight of what you're doing. And problem solving is a really big one. And persistence and and not being too scared of working too hard sometimes as well, because I try and keep a work-life balance, but in the past I've had times when I've just been so into something that it's just taken over.
Do people, is it worthwhile people considering if they want to follow a similar route? Is it worth going into doing a particular degree or master's type focus, or how can people learn and develop these sorts of skills that you deploy on a daily basis?
There aren't, in terms of degrees or masters, there are definitely in geospatial. I mean, there are lots of masters out there specifically related to geospatial technologies. But in terms of the key technologies that we've used, things like Google Earth Engine, there's another one called the Microsoft Planetary Computer. A lot of these are quite specific technical skills, and the best place to pick them up is online training courses, MOOCs, things like that, and rolling your sleeves up and getting stuck in and, having a go and seeing what you can do with these technologies, what you can achieve. But yeah, I think there isn't necessarily a dedicated course, I don't think, to do this, or path to do this. It's just it's a mixture of different skills from different.
But people can do that at home and start developing those skills, take free online courses, and actually sort of start to play with the toys. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I heard that you're involved in the Earthshot competition as well through Restor. Like, how did that go?
Yeah, that was really wonderful. I mean, we've all been kind of so busy this year doing stuff, and then October, I think it was, we found out that we'd been nominated as a finalist within the Earthshot Prize, which is this prize that Prince William has kind of orchestrated for the next 10 years, I think it is.
Yeah.
And so we're a finalist. We were a finalist. Unfortunately, we didn't win. We were up against Costa Rica and a project in Congo, and Costa Rica won. But yeah, we were really, really pleased to be nominated and kind of, to be. Yeah, it was good.
That's really good. Huge kudos to what you're doing, and presumably it throws quite a spotlight onto you at just the right time, as well as you're kind of starting to get this idea out there into the world and gain traction. So yeah, I mean, enormous well done to you and the team. That's incredible. Andrew, it's been really, really nice to talk and to catch up a little bit as well, and to kind of share your journey and what you're working on right now. If people want to find out a little bit more about Restor and get involved or support in some way or be part of the community, like where should we send them?
First place to go is, and probably the only place, is www.restor.eco, and that's the website where we have all of the restoration sites around the world. But there's a lot more information on Restor about what we do and who to contact. So yes, please go and visit that.
Fabulous. Restor.eco. We'll send people that way. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the Conservation Careers podcast.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Nick.
Cheers. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.